Hello and welcome to Unicorn Diaries by ET Catalyse. It's our attempt to give you a peek into the journey of companies that have billion-dollar valuations and the challenges that lie ahead for them. I'm Aloni Bhatt. Now today we have with us Monish Darda, co-founder and CTO of Icertis, a SaaS company that aims to transform contracts. Yes, contracts. You know, those boring state legal documents that contain language that few understand and clauses that for most of us make little sense. Now, Icertis says they can turn those contracts into a business advantage for companies because of the intelligence and the visibility that their platforms and products provide. Now, as I said, I have with me the company CEO and co-founder, CTO and co-founder, Monish Darda, who's had a very interesting journey from being a student of petroleum engineering and then mechanical engineering, and that just by sheer chance, interning as a coder. He went on to study mechanical engineering at Florida Atlantic University. And since then, he has contributed to the success of companies he's worked at and also built companies along the way, Icertis being one of them. Monish, welcome to ET Catalyse.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and thank you for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Monish, tell us a little bit about how the journey has been for Icertis. To becoming one of India's most valued SaaS unicorns.
Yeah, and it's been very interesting. I think when we started, Samir, who's my co-founder and our CEO, and I were both coming out of acquisitions. And this was my 7th startup, actually. So I've been a startup person and entrepreneur all my professional life, except for my first formative years in the first 3 or 4 years, where I was working, again, exploring my other kind of hobby or passion in automotive engineering. So I was part of Automotive Research Association of India. And when Samir and I met, and this was much later when I had already gone through 6 startups, we were both coming out of acquisitions, and we said, hey, now that, we want to do our own company, there's no way we can get to a steady job. So we have to do another stint. But this time, we didn't have a product in mind. So this is Icertis was my first company where I did not have a product in mind or an idea in mind when I started. So I remember the first conversation, Samir and I, was, how do we build a consequential company? And how do we build it? What kind of values and culture would we love to be part of it? And then again, serendipity hit. We started with no idea what we were going to do as a product, but we started because, we gelled with each other, our values matched. And when we started, we walked into a situation where, Samir is actually ex-Microsoft. He met a colleague of his at dinner. He asked him, Samir, what do you do? And Samir said, we are working on the cloud because that's the wave that we think is going to come, and we would like to ride that wave. And he said, I don't understand that. What you're saying, I'm not a technologist, I'm a lawyer, but we have a problem in Microsoft that is very big. Would you like to, take a look at it and see if you can help us? And that is how we actually went into contract lifecycle management. There was no other reason. We had no clue. Of course, we had handled our contracts ourselves. Samir was CEO, so he'd seen a lot of contracts, including complex, acquisition contracts. But we didn't know what contract lifecycle management was really. Now, looking back, it's very interesting. Our first customer was Microsoft. We had 160,000 users all over the world. We were deployed in 70 different countries across Microsoft subsidiaries, and we handled contracts in 40 different languages. So our first customer was an enterprise customer, worldwide deployment. We got the opportunity of building something that was built for the enterprise from the ground up and from the word go.
A lot of companies have trouble building trust, right? And especially when you look at something like contract lifecycle management, and if you're going to, it's going to go fully digital, and then you're going to ask companies that companies that have otherwise always dealt with pen, paper, written contracts. It's very difficult to build trust. So for you just leaped, essentially.
It wasn't that simple, of course. In the enterprise, it never is. But we had to build trust. I think what helped, I think two factors helped. Typically, when you build trust, the first question anybody asks you as a prospect is, hey, what other customers do you have? For our second customer, the answer was Microsoft, which in itself built a lot of credibility. The second one was, whether the company, small or otherwise, has the opportunity to actually execute over the long term. Because, if you think about it, today we have more than 50 customers in the Fortune 100, right, or Fortune 500. Some of the largest companies in the world, including Microsoft, are customers. Johnson & Johnson Pharmaceuticals, for example, Daimler and Mercedes-Benz, for example. So these are extremely large customers, global operations and are our customers. When you had that credibility already with Microsoft as your first customer and then these large customers, the second one they all look at is, are you credible enough to actually execute in the long run? Maybe you got lucky with your first 2 or 3 customers. Can you sustain that? And I think it also, our backgrounds also play. Both Samir and I have been entrepreneurs. Both of us have been in enterprise software. And, there was already that credibility. I think the third thing that happened was when we decided to raise our first institutional funding round. I think that adds a lot more credibility, especially with the people who come on board, on your board of directors. I think that also adds a lot of credibility. So it was a journey with a lot of milestones in between to build that trust. And you're absolutely right. I think especially with contracts, building trust, strengthening bonds is extremely critical. And it's been a journey, and it continues to be.
I'm curious to know how much has the recent digitization within organizations and workforce, led to this adoption of digitization of contract lifecycle management?
So it's actually a very interesting question for 2 reasons. One is digital transformation has always been a large play in most enterprises, because especially the brick and mortar ones want to transform, want to take IT on and software and enhance their business. They've seen successes like all of these ride sharing apps, for example, where the whole business has been built on software, and they want to take that technology and they want to make sure that they digitally transform their businesses. But as Satya said at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, he said, the digital transformation of the next 5 years has been compressed in these 5 months. And it's been so true, right? So digital transformation starts with taking, complex enterprise processes and saying, hey, where can I introduce technology to make these processes better, right? And I'll give you one example. One of our very early customers was Daimler, a German company out of Stuttgart, brick and mortar, manufacturing some of the world's best cars. They sent an email because they looked at our website. Tiny, we were like less than 100 people at that time, right? Tiny Icertis suddenly gets an email saying, hey, we are Daimler so-and-so. We would be interested in talking to you for contract lifecycle management. And Samir and I said, is this, phishing, or is it real email? But that is how people look at digital transformation, because their CIO, when I went to Stuttgart for the first time for a sales call, because Samir and I did sales calls then. I did sales calls a lot more than I do today. And the CIO of Daimler said, Monish, we are talking to you because digital transformation is something we take seriously. And one of our board members took the rest of the board to the Googles and Apples in the Silicon Valley to show them how software companies work. And we said we have to transform like them. And one of the things was, if you look at manufacturing a car and producing a new model, it would take 5 to 6 years to build a new model, right? With all of the parts, there are thousands and thousands of parts that go into a car. And he said, we want to bring this down to less than a year to launch a new car model. And for that, we saw everything, we could shave 1 day here, 1 week here, maybe 3 or 4 days if we did it this way. But we found that our contracting took 6 months. So if we could reduce that time from 3 months to even 6 months to even 3 months, we would have saved 3 months in the entire cycle. And that's how we reached out to you folks. And I think that is where digital transformation, self-service in contracting has become so important in enterprises, that these long processes where there has been no solution for now, and there's been no system of record for contracts for so long, that Icertis and Icertis Contract Intelligence kind of gives you that foundation of taking those processes and digitizing them.
Can you tell us a little bit about ICI, the Icertis Contract Intelligence, which uses AI and ML? Can you explain to us a little bit of how this will really benefit organizations?
Absolutely. So think about a contract, right? For most of us, contracts, as you rightly said, are legally is very hard to understand. The clauses are, something that you struggle to. So you sign and then you forget it and you lock it, in a cupboard. If you run into a problem, then you have to look it up and see, what was written in the contract, understand it. And that's how usually contracts have been viewed as glorified document management systems, right? What we did, which was very interesting, and over the years we realized that this was a journey, was that we looked at what was written inside the contract. So that is the intent of the contract, right? And a contract preliminary defines a relationship between two or more parties, right? So especially if you look at any contract really, but if you look at the enterprise contracts, it really defines it commercially, legally, based on their obligations and commitments. What am I going to do for you so that you can pay me, and vice versa. All of that is the intent of the contract, right? And you spend a lot of time negotiating and getting the intent of the contract right, and then you take it and put it in a closet, right? And then you run into difficulties. You start digging out the contract. Maybe you have a lawsuit, maybe you have a disagreement with the other party, and then you figure out, how do I bring that relationship back on track, or how do I get compensated if the relationship was not fulfilling. Now the problem is that the intent of the contract is not enough. You have to take it and realize it in the real world. So what we do as a very clear benefit is that first of all, we allow you to have a repository across the enterprise, across your sales, across your HR, across your procurement, across your finance, your real estate, leasing, etc. And we bring all of your contracts in one place. Then we extract the intent of the contracts. Because we have one of the largest repository of contracts on the planet, we can actually now use artificial intelligence and machine learning to learn about the intent. So even if humans cannot understand it, and you need lawyers to interpret contracts, because we already have an interpreted set of contracts, we can actually apply that intelligence to figure out what the intent is. And once that intent comes out, we tie it to transactions, right? And now what happens is, if you have an invoice to pay, then you can check it back automatically with the contract, whether it is right to pay, whether it has fulfilled the conditions of the contract, whether the intent has been fully realized before you can actually make that payment. And that makes businesses run better. Because now whatever is in your contract, whatever you have agreed, whatever you have negotiated, actually now happens in real life. And now you take it as an example, like for example, Johnson & Johnson runs $80 billion of their procurement contracts, $80 billion that they spend every year for manufacturing all of their products across the world. That $80 billion worth of contracts now go through the Icertis Contract Intelligence platform. Now you know that even 5% or even 1% of savings that is driven when your intent is actually realized and you have a way to check what is happening can result in hundreds of $millions of savings per year. And that's what our customers realize in practice. Because now what happens is the contracts are not locked in a cupboard. They have now come, they participate in the business flow, right? And as you do business, you have your contracts play a role in that business process. And that's where you save money. That's where you reduce your risk. That's where you increase your compliance.
Now, Monish, how do you see smart contracts on the blockchain? I mean, this is a completely new technology which is coming up. Also untested. So this whole thing about trusting a blockchain, trusting a smart contract, whether There are standards for smart contracts and stuff like that. Like all of those things come in. I saw that there's some bit of blockchain technology in some of your solutions.
Yes.
So, can you explain a little bit about that, and how do you see the future with it?
Yeah, let me take an example. Usually a contract has a commitment and an entitlement, right? I commit to buy pencils from you at, ₹1 a pop, and I commit to buy, 10,000 pencils. If I don't buy 10,000 pencils, if I end up buying only 100 pencils, you are going to charge me ₹1.20, right? And if I buy 100,000 pencils from you for the next year, I'll get a 20% discount and I'll get that pencil for 80 paise, right? So that's a, entitlement, and there is a commitment, right? So both ways. And there are payment terms, that 30-day payment or 60-day payment. If you delay, there's 2% interest. So there's always this, that's how the relationship is defined, let's say, in a contract. Now, typically, these two parties, when they sign the contract, trust each other that what they have signed will be adhered to by both parties. And the party will supply pencils at the right quality at the right time, in time. And, this party, when they check the quality and make sure that the pencils have reached them properly, will pay the other party what they've promised, right? Now, all this turns into trust as soon as you sign the contract, right? If the trust breaks, one party does not fulfill its commitments, you can always ask them to commit, or you can go to court, right? Going to court is a very expensive process. So you want to make sure that you kind of try to keep that at a minimum, preferably not do it at all. So what are your choices? You don't have too much of a choice. You just have to have people working on it in process to do it well and not fail on your commitments, so that the other party is not mad at you. Now, what smart contracts do is essentially turn all of this, 5% discount if 100,000 pencils and 10% penalty if you don't deliver in time, and all of this, they take all of that and they convert that into code. And the beauty of a distributed ledger or this blockchain is that both parties independently can verify that the code that is running on the blockchain is the code that they certified, that they verified, right? That there is nothing else that has come in that is executing that will change the rules of the game in the middle, right? So this is a trustless environment, as they call it, right? Because even if both parties don't trust each other, they can trust the code that both of them have signed or put on the blockchain and is now executing. And when that executed, that is what is called as a smart contract. So the smart contract in layperson terms is nothing but code that is completely verified and trusted by two parties running in a neutral environment.
You guys saw an incredible run in 2021, right? Doubling your customer base. So what was the reason, for this success? Anything specific that worked out for you?
I think it's a combination of many things. I think the one big thing, of course, as I said, is that digital transformation. And as Satya said, it just compressed, right? And at this time, people want self-service and contracts. So I'll tell you another data point, which was very interesting, very fascinating for Samir and I as well. We signed some of our biggest contracts in 2021 without actually meeting any of our customer folks, right? So millions of dollars of contracts were signed without people meeting people. And when you want to do it at that scale, think about $80 billion of procurement or $40 billion of sales or $30 billion of leasing or insurance claims, for example. They were all happening remotely. And that's where contract management becomes critical because you can actually now automate the process. You can make it self-service. You can make it contactless, touchless, remote, whatever it is, globally, without people having to come together physically to sign, for example, or negotiate. And I think that was one of the prime reasons that we actually also saw the uptake.
Now that you're a leading SaaS unicorn, are there challenges? What are the challenges that you foresee?
I think the big challenges always are, how do you handle scale, right? We've learned over the years, both Samir and I have no experience of running a $5 billion, 2000, well, Samir has experience of running a $3,000 people company. He was the CEO of a company which was at that scale, but we have never run a company that has so much in the future, right? So we are learning every day, and I think that's the difficult part. Kind of, how do you evolve? How do you keep in front? How do you make sure that the competition that comes in, the young generation, the young startups that come in who challenge, like we challenged when we were doing business, when we started, responding to RFPs. There were always three companies who were in competition. That was IBM with their mTORIS product, SAP, and Oracle. And we beat them every time. I'm sure there is someone in waiting there to challenge Icertis and say, hey, we are going to win CLM RFPs from you. So how do you make sure that you're ahead of the game? How do you make sure you keep on your toes every day? How do you make sure what you've built so far is not just protected, but is enhanced? You can't sit still in this day and age, which means that you have to do things better than you ever did before in your lives. And that makes you grow. And that's why I love being an entrepreneur too. Every year you grow as a person, you learn new tricks, you unlearn bad things. And that's how you grow as a person, not just as a company.
Can you tell us what are the ambitions that you have for Icertis over the next 5-10 years?
I think our ambition hasn't changed from the first day Samir and I had our conversation of starting Icertis, that of building a consequential company. I think everything else, success, unicorn, now we call what is called as the centaur, because we are among the very few companies with more than $100 million of revenues, that the only thing stopping us from getting to the big league is really execution. So these are, very small. There are 500 maybe unicorns in the world, but there are only maybe 50 centaurs. And we are counted as one of them in one of Bessemer's reports. And I think all that is fine. I think that's also how you measure your success. But I think, our ambition of building a consequential company doesn't change. I think that's the most important. And that's one reason why we always end up thinking ahead, right? We don't optimize for the short term. We always take our decisions for the long term. And that's one lesson I've learned out of the 7 startups, that you have to think long term to be really successful. If you look at optimize the short term and you forget the long term, then it may not be a sustainable business. So that's the ambition, really.
Monish Darda, co-founder and CTO of Icertis, thank you so very much for your time, and good luck with building the consequential company that you want and powering dreams.
Thank you so much, Meloni. Really appreciate it. And I love the conversation. I hope all the viewers do as well.
We had a wonderful time talking to you. Good luck to you, and thanks once again.